Griffith was born as a poor commoner, but here in his youth is also where Griffith would look above his poverty-ridden village and gaze at the beautiful, grand castle. Griffith as a child set his sights to obtain a kingdom of his own one day, something 100% impossible for a commoner to do. This childlike dream didn't die out or get crushed like for most people. His ambitions only grew along with his age. He would climb and use anything to his disposal to become this god of his own kingdom. Now what if I told you in Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree, Miquella the Kind's charming, handsome appearance is not the only striking similarity. In fact, you may know that Miyazaki takes Berserk as a heavy influence and inspiration for a majority of his gaming career, and that's why I think that Miquella the Kind is Elden Ring's own Griffith. But before we can dig deeper into why and how Miquella is the Griffith of Elden Ring, we need to figure out who and what Miquella is. Miquella was born as a twin to Malenia. They were both born with curses of their own and stood close to protect each other. Miquella was cursed with eternal youth and had a special ability to seduce people into loving or obeying him. Miquella along the lines started to attempt to grow his own Erdtree like Marika did, but he did this with his own blood and called it the Halic Tree. With this new Erdtree of his, he would try to make the world a gentler place. But Miquella realized he could not create an Erdtree of his own without ascending to godhood like Marika did. And to become a god, you first need a consort, which is when Radahn started to catch Miquella's eye. But Radahn either declined or they could only assume that he would not consent. So this led to Miquella sending Malenia and her knights to defeat Radahn for him. It was a hard-fought battle, but as kind of a kamikaze attack, Malenia whispered to Radahn, "Miquella awaits thee, O promised consort," and blew up her scarlet rot, affecting all of Caelid and making Radahn into a mad, savage beast. Around the same time, Mohg kidnapped Miquella to grow him up into godhood, so Mohg could become his consort instead. But Miquella ended up using his power and charming Mohg to get into the realm of shadows by mixing their blood and using Mohg's body as his soon-to-be vessel of Radahn's soul, because the player actually has to defeat Radahn and Mohg to aid Miquella in combining the vessel and the soul. Since Miquella left to the realm of shadows to reach the gate of divinity so he could become a god, he couldn't greet Malenia back home at the Halic Tree. Here in the realm of shadows, Miquella would assemble a group of followers by using his charming powers. In the realm of shadows, Miquella once again relies on the player to do all the work for him. So once the player ends up opening up the entrance to the gate of divinity for him, you find that Miquella successfully used Mohg's body to put Radahn's soul into, where he finally obtained godhood. The main thing to take away from Miquella's entire story is that Miquella is a little selfish and is willing to use any benefit to aid him, no matter the moral implications. He had no shame sending his sister to kill his half-brother Radahn, not only uncaring about defeating Radahn, all for his own petty reason that Radahn isn't handing over his soul so that Miquella can become a god, but uncaring over his loving sister's life by sending her into this horrible war, which did indeed leave her in an even worse injured condition. But when she came back to the Halic Tree to greet Miquella, he was still too busy somewhere else working to become a god. This goal of becoming god is very similar to Griffith's goal of getting his own kingdom, because the power he desires is godlike. And later on, Griffith literally does become a god, just like Miquella. You may defend Miquella's actions because his goal is to make a more gentle world, but this is not unlike Griffith's same goal to make the world also more peaceful after becoming god. The main difference between the two that makes Griffith 100 times more evil than Miquella is that Griffith caused the devastating problem that he's now trying to fix to gain power, while Miquella is only trying to fix Marika's devastating effects. So before I get into my next points, let it be heard that Miquella, while not as innocent and kind that you may think, is labeled Elden Ring's Griffith, not because his actions are equally deplorable, but their footsteps vaguely take the same path. A good example of what I mean is that both of them make sacrifices to become a god. Miquella sacrificed Radahn, who's generally stated to be one of the most wholesome and nicest bosses in Elden Ring, before going mad. He also sacrifices Malenia's health, but is not to say that Miquella was going to completely abandon her in the Halic Tree forever. Maybe he would come back after becoming a god and be able to completely heal her from the Scarlet Rot, if gods hold that type of power. The last sacrifice Miquella takes is Mohg, who's a creepy, evil cult leader who steals people's blood. So with all this said, this is nowhere compared to Griffith's thousands of sacrifices of his knights even before the eclipse, because when the eclipse strikes, he officially sacrifices everyone dear to him, and even doubles down by doing something really bad. But the eclipse in Berserk is also depicted as a homage in Elden Ring. This might sound absolutely insane, but I believe that Mohg's boss fight is very similar to the eclipse in Berserk. Before you click off, let me explain, because the tragedy and trauma of the eclipse might actually blind you in what it actually is. The eclipse is a sacrifice to become an apostle, but in Griffith's case, he basically becomes a god, as a new member of one of the 5 god hands. This brings us to Mohg's boss fight, where the player has to defeat Mohg as a sacrifice for Miquella becoming a god. But the most interesting similarity is that Miquella sits in this cocoon during the boss fight, not unlike the cocoon Griffith sits in during the eclipse. The reason Griffith is doing this while his comrades are being sacrificed during his eclipse is to be born as Femto, which is his god form. So basically, Griffith is shedding away his old human skin and turning into a god. This is exactly what Miquella is doing while you sacrifice Mohg. The hand that reaches out of the cocoon is Miquella shedding his old skin so he can become a god, just like Griffith. When Griffith first appears after conviction, he welcomes Guts, quote, in this new body of flesh. In both the stories, we see both Griffith and Miquella in this new divine form after shedding from their own cocoon. But this will be discussed more later. But this is why you may think that there are 2 Miquellas, one in the cocoon and the one you fight at the Gate of Divinity. But the cocoon is just a husk of his old self. The cocoon is called Cocoon of the Empyrean because Empyrean means someone with the potential to become a god. And this is all why Mohg's boss fight is equal to Griffith's Eclipse. Both involve a sacrifice while the creation of a god happens in the cocoon. Absolute mic drop from Lord Dylan. This is actually the smartest lore connection I've ever made. Like and subscribe for more spiritual lyrical miracles. A big part of Griffith's power before and after the eclipse is his followers, the Band of the Hawk. Before the eclipse, many of the Hawks said that Griffith's pure charisma and confidence gave them hope and comfort to follow Griffith along his journey. One of many examples is when Casca describes Griffith as some saint, awe-inspiring, otherworldly spectacle, miracle. It's without saying that even before becoming a god hand, Griffith always had inhuman charm. This only strengthened when he did come back as a god, charming all apostles like Zod to work under him, as he is the chosen absolute one. He is able to lead almost every apostle and charms even more humans into joining the Band of the Hawk. When I first saw Miquella, a small docile man, laying on the big beast Radon for the first time during the second phase of the final boss fight, it reminded me of Zod and Griffith. I think that the final boss of the DLC, Promise Concert Radon, is inspired by the few chapters at the end of Conviction Arc, where for the first time after becoming a god, Griffith shows himself in public to the physical world, being carried by Zod. This big beast you think would dominate over Griffith, but since Griffith has ascended to godhood, Zod obeys him. Even the panels of this in the manga give a divine feeling. It's all white, but you can feel the light blasting through the page. And this exactly happens to Miquella. Very similarly, he reveals himself from the glowing light with this glowing divine appearance and mounts the giant beast. The player in Elden Ring seeing Radon like this gets the same starstruck feeling Guts has, because the base game and all of the DLC has been leading up to this one moment, just like how all of Conviction Arc has led up to meeting Griffith once again. Miquella even says something along the lines of, "Yield to us so we can bring greatness," which has to be talking about the more gentle world he wants. This dialogue is also very reminiscent of when Griffith showed up to Godot's just to tell Guts he will not give up on his dream, and had Zod fight Guts. This final boss and the end of Conviction and the start of the Millennium Empire arc are another example of a mic drop moment, one-to-one connection. Once again, subscribe and comment for more. I've never felt more smart discussing Elden Ring until now. Griffith's charm is direct inspiration to Miquella's main superpower throughout Shadow of the Erdtree, of charming the other NPCs into becoming followers of him, and making his own band of knights called the Needle Knights, in which, very similarly to Casca's backstory of being a poor girl in a horrible situation, being saved by Griffith and charmed, Miquella would also save those weak and less fortunate, and charm them. This is seen by how Miquella made the Halic tree for those unfortunate like Albinorix, who at all stages are just deformed man-made humans. In Berserk, the only one who opposes and following Griffith and tries to defeat Griffith head-on is the Demon King. But in Elden Ring, the only one who opposes Miquella and tries to fight him is the Tarnished, which is you. I'm pretty sure there's a cut ending that happens if you side with Miquella, but as a silly little autistic fan canon ending for the DLC, the ending where you defeat Promise Concert Radon, which is the real ending, you put an end to Miquella's dream. But the ending where Promise Concert Radon defeats you, maybe if you gave up on him because he was too hard, you could imagine that alternate ending as the same thing that happens when Griffith defeats the Demon King. I know I'm throwing across the court shots here, but I think this is what makes Miyazaki's lore writing so great and personal. Everyone knows that some of it is left to be predicted and up to interpretation by what other clues you have in the world around you, but the lore also gives you the freedom to reach all the way to a completely different IP and series to fill in your own speculations. Mic drop. I'm on absolute fire this video. So in conclusion, Miquella is the Griffith of Elden Ring. This is seen by their very similar paths to the goal they take. The boiled down journey and scenes from Berserk having striking connections to Elden Ring, alongside the appearance and personality, helps cement Miquella as Elden Ring's Griffith. Miyazaki's inspiration to Berserk truly shines through even in the most recent release to date, and helps immortalize great storytelling in Kentaro Miura's masterpiece,